Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. This tutorial is in continuation with the earlier one where we learned all about form validation fundamentals. Let me quickly give you a brief overview of what we learned so far in the previous tutorial, and subsequently we will learn all new concepts related to form validation in detail in this demo. So let's start. Guys, in the previous tutorial I showed you two ways for customizing the error message for size constraint which we placed on top of student hobby field. The first way which we looked at was you simply provide the custom error message as an argument at the place where you declare the size constraint like this. And the second way which we looked at was you provide the custom error message in a separate properties file in your Spring MVC project. And for that, what I did in the previous tutorial, I included a properties file with the name student messages in the project and provided the custom error message for size constraint in that file. For Spring MVC to consider this properties file at runtime when any constraint violation occurs, I included this code snippet in the Spring's configuration file in this project. With this code snippet, I'm simply instructing Spring MVC framework. Hey Spring MVC framework, in this project, I have included a properties file with the name student messages. At runtime, when any constraint violation occurs, please consider this file to get the custom error message for that constraint. So after all these changes, now if I provide here some value in the student hobby field which would violate the size constraint which we have placed on top of student hobby field and submit the form, the application is gonna send back the same admission form with this error message description. And the point to note here is this error message which Spring MVC is displaying in case of size constraint violation is actually coming from this properties file. As all this which I just talked about in a very brief manner, I explained in detail in the previous tutorial. Now let's proceed further. Guys, here in this error message, I would want you to observe a very important point. I've hard-coded here three important values in this error message. The field name, for which I kept the size constraint, min value that is 2 and max value that is 30. Field name that is student hobby, for which I kept size constraint, min value that is 2 and max value that is 30. Now Spring MVC says, developers, this is not so good way to keep all these as hard-coded values in the error message. In future, if some developer would make a change in any of these three values here in the student class, then he would need to make a change in this error message too for all those modifications, which is not so good way of programming. So Spring MVC says, developers, in order to avoid this situation in future, you simply replace these hard-coded values with these placeholders, that is 0, 1 and 2 placed in curly braces. Now after this change, at runtime, when any user would violate the size constraint which we have placed on top of student hobby field, then before displaying this error message to the user in the response web page, Spring MVC framework would replace these placeholders with the corresponding values which we have provided here in the student class. It would replace 0 with the field name that is student hobby, 2 with the min value that is 2 and 1 with a max value that is 30, which we have provided here in the student class. Guys, let me quickly show you this working on the browser, and subsequently I would explain more on the changes which I've just made in this properties file. Guys, for Spring MVC to consider all the changes which we have just made in this properties file, we got to restart the server. So let's stop the server and start it again. Cool. So server is up again. So after this change, now if I provide here some value in the student hobby field, which would violate the size constraint which we have placed on top of student hobby field and submit the form, let's see what happens. Cool. The application sent back the same admission form with this error message. But the point to note here is, before displaying this error message in the response web page, Spring MVC replaced all these placeholders with the corresponding values which we have provided here in the student class. So far, so good. Now, there are a couple of important points which you should note here for all the changes which we just made in this properties file. Guys, I just showed you the concept of placeholders which we provided here in the custom error message for size constraint. But in general, while using such placeholders in any other custom error message in this properties file for any other constraint, you please follow these simple guidelines. Now, one last and important concept. Guys, in this demo, if you remember, I had to restart the server after I made change in this properties file for Spring MVC to consider it. Now, Spring MVC says, hey developers, if you do not want to restart the server every time you make a change in this properties file, then you simply go to the Spring's configuration file in your project and add this statement in the message source bin. With this statement, I'm simply instructing Spring MVC framework, hey Spring MVC framework, at runtime, you please load all the changes which anyone is making in this properties file after every 1 second. Guys, I would recommend using this feature only in the development environments and not in the production environment, because this feature may degrade the performance of application. So use this feature only and only if it is needed. Otherwise, don't use it in your application. In the next tutorial, we learn about some more form validation annotations like not null, not empty, past, future, etc., along with looking at some more concepts related to form validation. Guys, a big thank you for liking all of my tutorials on Spring MVC series. If you have any feedback or queries, please provide them below the video or simply write to me on this email ID for all of your queries. Please hit the like button if you really like the video, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Gone To series, and I'm gonna catch you in my next tutorial.